In recent years, few political figures have sparked as much controversy as former President Donald Trump. Throughout his tenure, and especially in his second term, Trump's cabinet appointments and nominations have been a source of heated debate, particularly regarding diversity, qualifications, and merit. While some of his supporters insist that his appointments were based on competence and loyalty, others have raised alarms about the lack of diversity, transparency, and qualifications of key individuals within his administration. One of the most glaring concerns has been the notable absence of African Americans in Trump's cabinet and senior positions, aside from the appointment of one black man, Dr. Ben Carson, as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. This has raised questions from black Republicans and conservative pundits who argue that the Trump administration has failed to properly represent their interests in his second term. But perhaps more troubling than the lack of diversity is the apparent trend of appointing individuals to high-profile positions who may not have the necessary experience or qualifications to serve in these critical roles. A prime example of this troubling pattern is Donald Trump's appointment of individuals like Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense and the ongoing support for figures who seem to owe their positions more to their proximity to power and media personalities than actual merit. In this video, we'll explore how Trump's approach to cabinet appointments and his apparent mockery of merit-based hiring has led to criticisms of nepotism and favoritism. We'll analyze how Trump's nominations, from the appointment of a Fox News weekend host to potentially handing out nuclear codes to individuals with questionable qualifications, paints a troubling picture of governance by loyalty and media fame rather than competence and experience. And lastly, we'll examine the response from black conservatives who now feel alienated by a president who promised them much, but delivered so little in terms of actual representation in his cabinet. The lack of black representation in Trump's second term. As Donald Trump filled his cabinet during his second term, one of the most pressing issues among black Republicans was the glaring absence of African American representation in key positions of power. Trump's administration had already been criticized for not having enough black faces in prominent positions, with Dr. Ben Carson serving as the lone African American in the cabinet as Secretary of HUD. While HUD is an important position, it has been historically viewed as the black department within the government. Many black conservatives were disappointed, feeling as though the only space available to them was one that had been assigned to them due to racial stereotypes rather than their qualifications. Several African American leaders within Trump's orbit began to openly express their frustration, calling out the administration for not appointing more qualified black candidates to high-ranking positions. The speculations around the administration's reluctance to appoint blacks to other roles were compounded by the continued focus on HUD. Black conservatives felt that this pattern demonstrated a systemic belief that there were black jobs in the administration that were reserved for a select few. As reported by ABC News, Trump's second-term cabinet appointments left many feeling left out. Only one black individual, Scott Turner, who previously served as the executive director of the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council, was appointed to a senior position, this time as Secretary of HUD. Critics of Trump's decision were quick to point out that this was hardly a true commitment to diversifying his administration, given the prominence of other important positions that remained largely filled by white individuals. While it's essential to acknowledge that representation matters, especially in a country as diverse as the United States, the question arises, why is it that black Republicans who have stood by Trump for years feel so excluded? Their concern isn't just about having black faces in high places, but also about ensuring that individuals who are qualified and competent are chosen based on their merits, not just as tokens of diversity. Nepotism and qualifications. The case of Pete Hegseth. One of the most troubling trends during Trump's administration was the nomination of individuals whose qualifications appeared to be secondary to their loyalty, media presence, and personal connections. Pete Hegseth, a weekend host on Fox News, is a prime example of this phenomenon. Hegseth, who had no experience commanding a military unit or holding a significant military position, was appointed by Trump as his nominee for Secretary of Defense. This nomination raised many eyebrows, given that the position of Secretary of Defense is one of the most critical in the U.S. government, responsible for managing the military and safeguarding the country's security. Despite his lack of experience, Hegseth's nomination seemed to be more about his media prominence than any real qualifications. Critics quickly pointed out that Hegseth had never even served in active duty in the military, but instead had a career as a television personality. To make matters worse, reports surfaced about his past behavior, including accusations of alcohol abuse and impropriety during his time in the National Guard. His record raised questions about his fitness for such a high-level position, especially when it came to managing the country's defense and military. The contrast between Hegseth's media career and the qualifications of others appointed to the administration, like General Lloyd Austin, couldn't have been starker. Austin, a retired four-star general and the first African-American to serve as Secretary of Defense, was highly qualified for the role. Austin had an illustrious career at West Point and in the U.S. Army, serving in numerous combat zones and achieving high-level positions within the military. Yet, despite his credentials, the Trump administration's attempt to promote figures like Hegseth raised serious questions about merit-based appointments. The criticism over Hegseth's appointment became even more pronounced when his mother, Penelope Hegseth, appeared on Fox News to defend her son, arguing that he had grown and matured since his past mistakes. While parental defense is not uncommon, the idea that a person could ascend to such an important position primarily because of their family connections and media fame was difficult to swallow for many Americans, especially those who took the notion of merit-based appointments seriously. This situation becomes even more ludicrous when we compare it to how other nominees were scrutinized. Take, for example, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, nominated by President Joe Biden to the U.S. Supreme Court. Jackson, who graduated from Harvard Law School and had decades of legal experience, faced a rigorous and transparent confirmation process. She earned her seat on the highest court in the land through years of hard work, impeccable credentials, and integrity. But when Jackson was nominated, her critics quickly labeled her as a DEI hire, a derogatory term meant to suggest that she was appointed because of her race rather than her qualifications. This kind of logic was applied to Vice President Kamala Harris as well, who faced similar accusations of being a token hire for her race and gender. However, when it came to Hegseth and other similarly unqualified individuals nominated by Trump, there seemed to be no similar scrutiny or criticism about the nature of their appointments. The role of family and loyalty in Trump's appointments. One of the key themes throughout Trump's second term was the role that family and loyalty played in his decision-making process. Trump frequently turned to individuals with strong personal ties to him, rather than focusing on their experience or qualifications. This trend wasn't just evident in his cabinet selections, but also in his appointments to key advisory positions. The most glaring example of this is Trump's relationship with his daughter, Ivanka Trump, and her husband, Jared Kushner. Both individuals held significant advisory roles within the administration despite having limited political or governmental experience. Ivanka was tasked with spearheading initiatives like workforce development and women's empowerment, while Kushner took on critical foreign policy roles, including managing the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Both were widely seen as having been appointed based more on their familial relationship to Trump than any proven track record of expertise. Similarly, Trump's appointments of figures like Hegseth and others reflected a preference for individuals who had been loyal to him, often through their media platforms, rather than choosing people based on qualifications or expertise in the fields they were tasked to oversee. The case of Pete Hegseth, with his media career and lack of military experience, became emblematic of how loyalty was sometimes more important than the actual qualifications needed for running critical government departments. Donald Trump's appointments to high-ranking positions during his second term exposed a disturbing pattern of prioritizing loyalty, media influence, and family connections over merit and qualifications. While the absence of qualified African Americans in his cabinet raised concerns within the Black Republican community, it was the trend of appointing individuals like Pete Hegseth to positions of power that underscored Trump's willingness to elevate individuals based on their personal relationships with him rather than their qualifications. From the defense of Hegseth by his mother, Penelope Hegseth, to the dismissive treatment of qualified candidates like Lloyd Austin, the Trump administration's approach to appointments seemed to reflect a mockery of meritocracy. This trend raises important questions about the values that guided Trump's presidency and how such decisions may have undermined trust in the political process. Ultimately, the case of Trump's appointments serves as a stark reminder that for many politicians, the lines between merit and loyalty can become dangerously blurred. When it comes to positions that hold the safety and security of the nation in their hands, like the Secretary of Defense or key cabinet roles, the stakes are simply too high for decisions based on nepotism and favoritism. The American people deserve leaders who are appointed based on their qualifications and experience, not just their proximity to power or media fame.